Hi, everyone, and welcome to another case interview and management consulting podcast from Firms Consulting. Today's episode is one where I'm going to step outside case interviews a little bit, although the thinking still applies there. And this episode originates from a discussion I had with a very long-time client. In fact, the person is still a client. So this person, who is a good client and I would say also a good friend, likes to make the following comment. He likes to say that Firms Consulting is like Fight Club. And then he said, well, the reason Firms Consulting is like Fight Club is because you don't want anyone else to have access to Fight Club because you don't want them to have access to these insights. If I was competing with someone, I would never introduce them to Firms Consulting because I want access to this material for myself. And by having access to this material by myself, I would have a competitive advantage that my competitors would not have, and I'd be able to move ahead faster than them. And of course, that's a nice compliment to get from a client, especially one you know so long. But I got to thinking about this even more. And while I can see why the client thinks this strategy of keeping all the insights to himself is a good strategy, it is ultimately flawed and will hurt him in the long term. And let me explain why that is the case. And this is going to apply whether you're doing anything whereby you are exposing yourself to new insights, right? The first thing is that we teach the skills of strategy partners. That makes us unique. There are many websites that teach consulting skills and strategy skills and case interview skills, but to have ex-partners teach it, that's pretty unusual. And you can see our thinking is very different from what's in the market. While we teach the skills of strategy partners, we're teaching you skills that you're going to apply in many places, and a lot of those places will be outside of consulting. So for example, we may have people who are listening to us now who are interviewing at McKinsey. We may have people who are listening to us who are associates at BCG. Others may be managers at Bain. Others may be partners at Deloitte. Others may not be in consulting at all. They may be running a boutique firm. Others may be launching a startup. Others may be in corporate, whereby you're a pricing manager or a human resources manager or a supply chain manager or a data analyst. In other cases, you may be an executive vice president in an industrial company. Some of you may be in government. Now, why does that matter? It matters because different things are valued in different industries. In consulting, insights are usually very valuable. And I'm going to explain to you why they're not always valuable, but they're usually very valuable. So for example, if you say, Michael, I'm listening to the Firms Consulting program on how to sell, and these insights are incredibly valuable, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these insights in my job. I can understand that. If you tell me, Michael, the program you put together on value chain analysis is amazing, I'm going to use these insights to introduce it into my thinking and my analysis on a consulting project. I can see the value in that. Because in consulting, usually what's valuable is having an insight that the client pays for. Not always, I'm going to get to that in a second, right? Because there's a big insight coming here. If you're in industry, and let's assume you are the head of the soup division of a company, and you walk into a meeting with all your senior managers and you've listened to me talk about sales and you have all these insights and you present your insights, you may be seen as valuable, but only insofar as you can use those insights to generate sales and you have a plan to generate sales and generate high margins. If you just present insights in industry, but you cannot actually do anything with it, you're not going to be rewarded. In consulting, if you come up with a very clever way to do an analysis, I was once showing a client a way to merge risk and corporate finance and corporate strategy to present a new way for a client to review options. He was very impressed with it. But I don't think he could implement it. If you walk into a client with this insightful way of presenting corporate strategy, but you don't have the ability to implement it, I'm not talking about implementing it into the client. I'm talking about implementing the analysis, doing the analysis. There's two types of implementation in consulting. One is doing the analysis, which is a form of implementation. And the other one, which is after you've done the analysis and you want to embed that thinking in the client, that's another form of implementation. People always think about the latter one, but there's two types. So this idea about not sharing insights is a bad idea and why is it a bad idea? Because it means that you think the most valuable thing you're getting from us is some interesting ideas or some very deeply insightful ideas. But in the real world, that's not that valuable. So if you are thinking, well, I'm never going to share what I'm learning I'm never going to tell people to use firms consulting because I don't want them to have access to these insights, then you are focusing on the wrong thing. You're focusing on the least valuable thing we can teach you. The most valuable thing is you have an insight, but now you got to roll it out. You got to implement it. Let's take a really important example here, right? An actual example from someone at Accenture. And the person will know who I'm referring to. Also, a long-term client, know him very well, great guy, but he also makes this mistake. So he works at Accenture, and I think he's now one level below partner, if I'm not mistaken. And he's working at an Accenture office where he's rolling out our thinking, and he loves it. He sees the value. He's done it himself when he was at more junior levels, and he sees how much value it brings to Accenture and clients. He goes into an engagement, and he's trying to get his team to use the new approach that we teach, which is not new. It's what most major elite firms do, and we've obviously adjusted it and made it better in some ways. But here's the problem he faces. One is his team doesn't know what he's talking about because they're not equipped, because they don't know this approach. They know their approach of doing things, which is different. Second is the senior manager, or I think junior partner, whatever he is, he's not a good teacher. Even if he was a good teacher, he would not know the material and the rationale as well as we would. So he's going into engagement. He's then trying to convince people who don't know this new way of doing things to do it in a different way. He's not a great teacher, so he's obviously not going to teach them well. He's obviously spending a lot of time that should be spent on the engagement, teaching people to do new things. He's causing a disruption. If he had told his team, you know what, I want you to go and sign up here, or if you're a member, use this, spend the next week watching these videos, let's talk about it on Friday, let's come up with a plan of how we're going to use it. Imagine how much smoother things would go on Monday. And that's the problem here. So it's not just, I pointed out the first problem, insight is not that valuable by itself. So if all you're doing is taking insights, you're making a mistake of thinking that you're at McKinsey if you work in industry. If you worked at McKinsey, insights are valuable, but they're only valuable if you can do the analysis. They're only valuable if you can implement it after the analysis. At industry, no one cares if you have the insight. It means nothing. You've got to get results, which is all about the latter form of implementation. But implementation means working in a team, which means that the team needs to speak the same language you speak. It means they need to understand why you are doing what you are doing. It means that all the homework, all the explanations that are needed for them to be on the same wavelength as you needs to be done before you arrive. Which means that they need to have access to everything we're saying so that it's not an alien concept when they hear it. So the biggest mistake clients make is to focus on only getting these insights and frameworks and methodologies and then putting it into a report and being called insightful. That's what I mean when I say it's a little bit of an insult. Just because you've been called insightful, it doesn't mean that you're a wonderful person who's going to have a glorious career in consulting, especially entrepreneurship, where being insightful means nothing unless you can convert it into something. And remember, implementation is two parts. You have an insightful analysis, you have to be able to do the analysis. That's part one of implementation. Part two is once you've done the analysis, you have to implement the findings to generate a new result in your business. So the biggest mistake clients make is to focus only on the insights and think that they're going to cause large-scale change in their organizations, even within their consulting teams, if they are the only ones speaking the language we are speaking, following the philosophy we are following, and following the methodologies we are following. It would be far more important and much more useful if your whole team was exposed to our thinking, so that when the time comes, everyone knows why what is happening and they know what to do, and you don't have to spend a lot of time educating them about this, because it's not your job to teach them. And it's hard to teach. I know, because I led training in strategy for a long time, and obviously through firms consulting, I do a lot of training. It's hard to train. Training is a skill. I'm not saying I'm the world's best trainer. I can't make any claims to that. I'll let the audience judge me on that one, but it requires a completely different mindset. Knowing how to do a strategy analysis is different from knowing how to teach a strategy analysis. But if you get caught into this mindset of just being insightful by yourself, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do if you have such an amazing insight that nobody understands? Let's assume the insight you have is actually incredibly useful to your client or to your company. Let's assume you're in corporate. It's incredibly useful. An example of the way we combine risk with corporate strategy, which I think is if I had to die tomorrow, this would be one of the smartest things I've ever done in the world. And maybe you should spend more time teaching it to people because it is so insightful. But what value is that if I teach that to you you go into your corporate strategy team at your employer and you talk about this, and it makes sense, but because it is so revolutionary versus being evolutionary that no one gets it. Because no one thinks the way you've been trained to think over so many videos. Think about how long it has taken you to grasp the concepts we teach. Because we teach from first principles. We don't just throw out frameworks, throw out ideas, and throw out solutions. We tell you how to get there. That's a different way of thinking. It's taken some clients a few months to get there. But then they assume that by just having a one discussion with a colleague, that colleague will make the same transition that took them 3 months to do. The client will make that transition in a 1-hour meeting. It can't be done. I remember when I switched offices as an associate and the partner asked me to run training for strategy, and I thought, I'm going to raise the standards at this emerging markets office. It took me about 4 to 5 to 6 full Fridays working with a team of 5 to 8 analysts and associates to bring them up to speed to know the basics of what I was trying to do. And a lot of it was just answering very, very, what I would call very simple questions, but for the audience, it was not simple. And again, it's not because the audience is not intelligent, it's because I make certain assumptions when I communicate, but those assumptions can be wrong, and I need to explain things rather than assuming people can make the connection. Or maybe I'm making the wrong connection, and I need to explain it in more simple ways. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, this is amazing. I've watching the show about how to become a McKinsey partner. I'm watching the show about I've watched the entire McKinsey BCG typical engagement, which shows me how to run a McKinsey engagement from structuring the analysis, developing the decision trees, writing out the storyboards. I have the skill. I've learned this over a month, and I'm going to dazzle everyone at my firm. I'm going to go there and I'm just going to be a superstar. You're not going to be a superstar if your team doesn't know what you're doing. And more importantly, if you're so junior, you can't get your team to change their behavior. But even if you could get them to change their behavior, do you have the energy to do that? Do you have the time to do that? Is that what clients are paying you to do in an engagement? To some degree, you train people, but a dramatic change, no. So I always tell clients, if you want to implement change, get the ideas, but you got to get your team thinking the way we think and the way you are now starting to think. And if you can get your team to think in that way, then wow, then you can do a lot. Then you have people that can implement what you are trying to do. But until you do that, you are just one person with a radical idea who doesn't have a team to follow them, who doesn't have senior management support, and honestly doesn't have the time to do what you want to do. And that's assuming you see the value of making these things roll out in an organization. If all you're doing is taking our insightful concepts and ideas and ways of thinking and writing reports, then you're probably, and I would say certainly not getting the maximum return from it, because it's not about reports. It's about doing something with them. Now, I've mentioned many different programs here. And before I continue, I think the most important thing is if you're an FC Insider, member of our loyalty program, you can watch all these programs on strategytraining.com. You can watch the program whereby I reordered and rebuilt an entire emerging markets office. It's called Rebuilding an Emerging Markets Office. In fact, in the latest videos we have there, I have videos where I've mapped out my entire career over a timeline showing you what studies I did over what time period. So you get a sense now of how many studies it would take under the right guidance to learn the skills of a strategy partner. It doesn't take that many studies. Because when I talk about training, you always think it maybe takes 50 studies. It takes about 6 to 7 studies. But that's the video program. If you look at Partnership Memoir, where I talk about how I learned to do these things, which was the partner and how they taught me, you can follow it there. If you don't have time to understand the background thinking, then you can go to How to Develop Deep Insights, which is 10 episodes, but it shows you the approach I use to develop insights. And of course, if you're not an insider, that's fine. If you go to firmsconsulting.com, that's firmsconsulting.com, and you register for free or you join one of our opt-ins, only for a short period, it's a limited time offer, we will send you some sample videos so you can see the depth and the detail we have beyond our in-depth programs available to insiders. Now, I'm going to end off here by saying this podcast may have sparked some questions in your mind. If you do have questions, post a comment. First, tell us what you like about the podcast so we know what to keep doing, because sometimes we test something and if it doesn't resonate with an audience, we drop it. So tell us what you like so we know to keep doing it. And if you have a question about something, post it in the comment as well, because I'll develop a follow-up episode based on that question. As always, I enjoyed this and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.